She's back from vacation, so let's get started. Hey everyone, it's Jananie and welcome back to my channel. This story ain't over. It has been a couple weeks, I think, since I posted because I was recently on vacation and I went to the UK and also to France. I was in several cities. I was in Edinburgh, I was in Bath, I was in Paris, I was in London, and overall it was just a wonderful and magnificent trip. But along the way, of course, since I am a booktuber and I am a ridiculously voracious reader, I knew I had to visit a bunch of bookstores. So you'll be getting a whole vlog of all of the bookstores that I visited in the UK that's coming soon. But before that, I thought I would haul all of the books that I bought on vacation. I am not kidding when I say that my carry-on luggage was quite literally 17 kilos because of all the books that I bought. I have about 23 to 24 books to get through today, so let's just jump right in. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, which is Book of the Month. You guys know I love and adore Book of the Month. I've talked about them so many times before. They are a wonderful online book service for readers. So you pay a subscription each month and you'll get a book of your choice from the selections that the Book of the Month team has curated for the month, and you'll get it in this lovely blue box. But recently, Book of the Month has also launched their app and also audiobooks, so you can choose to use your subscription for the month on either the hardcover book for the month or on an audiobook. Book of the Month is also really great about getting a really nice selection of books for you, a nice array of them. There's always a mix of big new releases, some debut authors, and also some emerging authors as well. So I, of course, picked up a couple of Book of the Month's selections for the month. First one I picked up is The Leftover Woman by Jean-nuh-nee. This is a family saga drama and also a bit of a mystery. And then the other book I knew I had to grab from Book of the Month was, of course, The Fragile Threads of Power by V.E. Schwab. I'm so freaking excited for this book and so glad that I was able to get it with Book of the Month this month. So if either of those books seem interesting to you, then definitely go check out Book of the Month. You can grab your first box for only $5 using the code SPOOKY and using the link down below. And honestly, $5 for a hardcover new release book is absolutely insane, so please jump on that deal. I just don't know why you wouldn't. Thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring today's video, and now let's get into my vacation book haul. So I went to 4 different cities: Edinburgh, Bath, Paris, and London. And in each city I acquired many books, and I also visited multiple bookstores for the most part in each city. So I'm going to take you through chronological order of my entire trip and the bookstores that I visited, and then let you know which books I got from which bookstores. Okay, so first up I grabbed 3 books from Golden Hare Books in Edinburgh. And honestly, these 3 books, I'm pretty sure I probably could have gotten them like here in Canada, but I still thought that they were super interesting and I wanted to pick them up. And they seemed like additions that were just really pretty, so I decided to grab them. I was also just really excited at the beginning of my trip, so that's also probably why I bought all of these books. So the first book that I got is The Siren's Lament: Essential Stories by Junichiro Tanizaki. This one seems really interesting. It's a series of stories in translation from Japanese, and what I found interesting was the way that the description called the short stories having a pulse with a restless eroticism. Let's just drink that in. Restless eroticism. Intrigued I am. There are 3 stories in this collection, and it seems like each one of them is slightly historical and maybe also speculative in some ways. So I'm overall hyped for this. I have been wanting to read more books in translation, and I've just been feeling short stories recently, so I think this one is gonna be just perfect for the season. The next book also seems super interesting. It's called Termouche, and this is by Sven Holm, and it is translated by Sylvia Clayton. The reason I was excited about this one is because it's also a translated fiction. It's translated from Danish, and it's also a sci-fi. I've been really feeling sci-fi. I absolutely love sci-fi at my core, and this one seems to have a peculiar premise to it. It involves this luxury resort called Termouche, and there's like these people who are staying in this resort, and the rest of the world is just sort of like falling apart on the outside. But then the management starts censoring news and some of the guests start getting sedated and all of this creepy stuff is just happening in the resort. And to add some context to all of this, the resort was also made for these wealthy guests who had the money to reserve spots well ahead of time when they knew that the world was going to fall apart. And so now this thing that they've reserved and, you know, paid for is turning on them. This seems super interesting. It's such a short and tiny little book, so I think it's going to pack a wonderful punch, and I'm really excited to see what I think of it. This next book is one that I'm honestly just like finding funny that I bought it in the UK because it's actually a Canadian novel by a Canadian author, and that is Split Tooth by Tanya Tagag. I've heard so many amazing things about this book, but I particularly just really liked this edition and cover. I'm sure I could probably find it in Canada as well, but just in case it wasn't available in Canada, I wanted to just grab it at that bookstore. And what I love about this is just the fact that it has this beautiful quote on the front of the book. It's just so stunning to look at. And for those of you who don't know what this one is about, it essentially follows this young Inuk girl who grows up in Nunavut, Canada in the 1970s, and essentially her world is sort of flipped upside down when she becomes pregnant. She's seeing the effects of alcohol and violence in her community, and she's just trying to navigate all of that. I know this one is just going to be a really stunning literary read, and I cannot wait to pick it up. Alright, the next bookstore that I went to in Edinburgh was Toppings and Company. This is a bookstore that actually has multiple locations in the UK, so I also went to the one in Bath, and I'll tell you the books that I bought from there in a second. But the books that I bought at the Toppings in Edinburgh are actually a series of just very short books. So the first is this like Penguin's Classics edition of Antigone. I don't know why I felt the need to buy yet another copy of Antigone, but I just had to. I'm pretty sure I probably could have gotten this in Canada as well, but I just love how tiny and cute this is and how it just has like the one play. For those of you who don't know, Antigone is a ancient Greek play. It's by Sophocles, and it's the third in a whole trilogy. If you've ever heard Oedipus Rex, that's like the first one. And this is by far like probably my favorite play ever, one of my favorite pieces of classical literature. And I just, yeah, kind of wanted like this tiny little copy for, I don't know, shits and giggles. I'm gonna keep it on my shelves. I'll probably annotate it at some point because it's just cute and adorable and just has like just this play in it. I feel like I have other copies of Antigone, but they're in like bigger collections. So yeah. And of course, while I was, you know, snooping this little like section of books that were all like Penguin classics, I also came across this set of Penguin modern classics, which included this little edition of Shirley Jackson's The Missing Girl. This is a short story by Shirley Jackson. I think I've talked about Shirley Jackson in multiple other videos, but I absolutely loved her book, The Haunting of Hill House. It's one of my favorite books ever, and it's one of my favorite classics and modern classics, if you will. So this is just a short story by her, and I was like, yeah, why not? Let me get it. It's just 50 pages, and I feel just like so validated by the satisfaction I'll have when I finish this. The next book is one that I don't know why I really picked it up, but I was just intrigued. The cover was kind of cool. It's a philosophy book. It's by an author that I've tried to read from before, and it also involves a piece of classic literature that I know well. So that book is this little book by Albert Camus. It is a piece of philosophy that's called The Myth of Sisyphus, and it basically uses the myth of Sisyphus to like talk about other philosophical concepts. If you like read the really tiny text here, it says there's but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. I don't know, that line just like intrigued me immensely, and yeah, I just wanted to read it. So it's this tiny little book. It's philosophy, so I haven't really tackled philosophy in a while, but I am hoping to do more of that in the coming months, years, so I thought that this would be a nice addition to my collection of things. The next couple books I grabbed from a bookstore called Lighthouse Books. I think that's what it was called. It was in Edinburgh, and this was probably one of my favorite bookstores that I visited, mainly because it just had a really, really good selection of books, and a lot of books by like BIPOC authors, LGBTQ authors, marginalized authors, and so you could see that in like every single one of their table displays and like curated shelves and that kind of thing. And so through one of those curated tables, I found this book, which is called We the Heartbroken by Gargi Bhattacharya. The person working at the store actually let me know that this imprint in particular, which is called Hajar Press, publishes mainly books by like marginalized and BIPOC authors. So I was really excited about that, and they're a UK-based small publisher, so that was just really cool to learn. And basically I believe this is a bit of a nonfiction, a personal essay type book where the author tackles several different themes, including racism, racial capitalism, austerity, war, collective grief, and personal tragedy. The person working at the store mentioned that this was just a really stunning book, so it just made me super excited to pick it up. And it's just so small and like thin, so that was also really pleasing to me because it just fools me into thinking that I'm going to be able to read so many more books because this is so short. And then the other book that I picked up at Lighthouse Books was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I kept seeing these editions all over the UK and like Europe, and they're just these beautiful like tiny little copies of these classics, like everything from Jane Austen to Charlotte Bronte to like so many other books. But what is really nice about them is that although like this cover isn't that stunning, it's got this beautiful gold lettering, and when you open it up and take off the dust jacket, it's like this beautiful, you know, cloth bound book. And my sister actually got me a copy of Little Woman in this like edition, and I really, really liked it. And so when I saw this for Pride and Prejudice, I was like, I need to get this because I was visiting Chatsworth House where the 2005 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice filmed Darcy's Pemberley house. So I was like, I need to have this for when I go visit Chatsworth House. So that was kind of the reasoning behind this, but it did come in handy because I started rereading Pride and Prejudice like halfway through the trip, so now I'm like 200 pages into this, and it's just really nice to just read from this like tiny little copy because it fits so perfectly in your hands and you don't feel like you're dragging around a giant book. I don't know. Something about it is just so deeply pleasing, and I needed to have it. So those were all the bookstores that I visited in Edinburgh and all of the books that I got in Edinburgh. Now we are on to the lovely city of Bath, which I was in for 2 days, and I visited a couple bookstores, and the first of which was Persephone Books. When I tell you that this was probably my favorite bookstore that I visited in the entire trip, like I am not lying. This was such a beautiful, small, independent bookstore that also actually publishes their own editions of books. Essentially, their mission is to publish or republish books by women who have been overlooked in history and who primarily come from like the 19th and 20th centuries. I just thought it was like so incredible what they were doing, and I loved that they had such a big array of selections to pick from. And they do publish some books by men, but for the most part they are focused on publishing books by, you know, underrepresented women in those time periods. So after much deliberation while I was at Persephone Books, I decided to pick up 2 of their books. So the first one is The Closed Door and Other Stories by Dorothy Whipple. While I was there, it seemed like Dorothy Whipple was one of the more popular authors that they had like published quite a few different works from, and this is a collection of her short stories. This author was born in 1893, and much like Jane Austen, covers the lives of women in very regular contexts. And then the other book that I picked up from Persephone Books was one that the shop owner described as a bit of a tragic, heartfelt romance. I was looking for something a little bit more romantic, and she said that this one would tug at the heartstrings. So that book is The Making of a Marchioness, and this is by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This author was born in 1849 and lived into the 20s. I can't remember exactly what the plot of this one is now off the top of my head, but I knew it was going to be something that I would really enjoy, so I'm excited to check it out. Alright, and then after Persephone Books, I decided to go to the Toppings and Company in Bath, and let me tell you, that location of Toppings and Company is like so freaking stunning because it's in this like sort of historic looking building in Bath. It's got like these grand pillars at the front, and it was just so beautiful to be in and look at. And while I was there, I was trying not to buy more books, but I saw yet another one of these Macmillan Collector's Library editions, and this time I grabbed Persuasion by Jane Austen. And the reason I grabbed this one in Bath was because this particular novel of Jane Austen's is actually set in Bath, and so I thought it would be fitting to grab a book that is set in Bath while I am in Bath so that I could read it in Bath. And honestly, it was just really great. I didn't finish the entire thing while I was in Bath, but I did read a bit of it while I was in Bath, and it just added to the vibe overall. Alright, so after Bath, I went to Paris for 4 days and I went to 2 bookstores, I think. Both of them were on my birthday. I didn't film anything on that day because it was my birthday and I just wanted to like relax and not have to sort of work. But I did go to 2 bookstores and they were both really lovely, and since it was my birthday, I did not limit myself for the amount of books that I was allowed to buy. So I kind of came back with more than I wanted to, but it's fine. Here we are. I made it back and I did not get charged for overweight luggage. So the first bookstore I went to in Paris was, of course, Shakespeare and Company, the famous bookstore in Paris, the one that everyone goes to and posts pictures about, and honestly it's just so beautiful. And it is one bookstore that does not allow you to take photos on the inside, so most people just take photos of the outside, but the inside, let me tell you, is so freaking stunning. So if you're ever visiting Paris, like, you need to go to Shakespeare and Company. It's probably my actual favorite bookstore I visited in the entire trip. It was just so stunning on the inside. They again also had really great selection of books, and what I really loved about that bookstore in particular was the second level of the bookstore is just a dedicated like reading space, and so there's no books on sale on that second level, but they have these really nice areas for just sitting down and reading, and it's really quiet and it's just like beautiful and stunning and you're just taking in the vibe, and I loved it so much. Like, I sat up there for a little bit and like started reading some of the books that I was gonna grab, and it just felt so wonderful. So while I was at Shakespeare and Company, I grabbed a few different books, but the first thing I actually grabbed was this little like envelope thing, and it's essentially this little like postcardy set of Shakespeare sonnets that have been selected by the Shakespeare and Company team, and it's just in this like really cute little like pull-out thingy, and I thought it was really cool and pretty, and so I got it. Alright, the first book that I actually got from Shakespeare and Company was this collection of poems selected by Shakespeare and Company, and it's called Paris in Our View. So it's essentially these poems that like are about Paris or written in Paris, and the Shakespeare and Company team have like selected these all and put them in a collection together. So I thought while I was traveling that this was like a perfect thing to sort of get as a souvenir for myself. It's about Paris, it's, you know, from a bookstore in Paris, and I just thought it would be like perfect, especially when I'm like looking back on this trip. There's a lot of poems in this collection and it has so many different authors in it, so I'm really excited to just like discover more authors and poetry that I've never seen before and just experience Paris in a new and different way. And then I grabbed a couple actual novels from Shakespeare and Company. So I grabbed Eileen by Ottessa Mossvegh. I know this author is really popular for having written My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I've never read that book. I do want to read it at some point, but I sort of came across this book at Shakespeare and Company and just thought the cover was really pretty, and it just intrigued me in some weird way. This cover is actually part of like a vintage American Gothic Classics editions set, so it's got like other books in this collection, so that's where this cover is coming from, but it seems to be a bit of a Gothic horror, which has me excited. And essentially the book follows our main character, who is a secretary at a boys' prison. And when this sort of charismatic and wonderful woman named Rebecca joins as a counselor at the prison, our main character Eileen is sort of drawn in by her. I think this is a little bit queer, I'm not really sure, but this sort of like growing attraction or fascination with Rebecca turns into a bit of a sticky situation when Eileen is pulled into a crime. I feel like this is going to be really atmospheric and great for spooky season, so cannot wait to pick it up. And then the final book that I picked up from Shakespeare and Company was The Storied Life of A.J. Fikry, and this is by Gabrielle Zevin. For those of you who don't know, Gabrielle Zevin is the author of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, which was one of my favorite books of this entire year so far. Like, that book sent me into tears, so many tears by the end of it, and I was just so impressed by that book. So I knew at some point I wanted to read another Gabrielle Zevin book, and this is one of the books that she published like before Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and this essentially follows like a bookshop owner, I think, and he's sort of this grumpy guy and his bookshop is sort of failing, but one day he finds this like 2-year-old girl named Maya in his bookshop, and there's a note attached to her asking the bookshop owner to take care of her. And so his life is sort of changed forever, and that's where our story is sort of beginning. This seems like it's going to be a really like heartfelt and heartbreaking story, and it's just giving me, I don't know, like Boo Radley vibes, and just, I don't know, like Up. It's giving me Up, like the Disney movie, Pixar movie Up. It's giving me vibes of that, and I don't know, I feel like it's gonna make me cry, much like Up, so we'll see. I did read a chapter or two of this while I was in the bookshop, and the vibes were just so perfect, and I just love Gabrielle Zevin's writing, so I think I'm gonna really enjoy this one. Alright, and then the second bookshop that I visited in Paris was the Abbey bookshop, and I grabbed, I think, 2 books there, so let's open this up. So the first book that I picked up was this really cute edition of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I feel like the running theme of this trip was me buying new editions of Jane Austen novels, but it's fine. The reason I wanted to pick up this particular edition of Northanger Abbey was because I really liked the feeling of it. Like, it's like this hard cover without any sort of dust jacket on it, and it's got these cute little illustrations on it, and it also has this quote from the book on the back, which I just really loved, and that was like reason enough for me to buy this. So it says, "I have no notion of loving people by halves. It is not in my nature." And I don't know, I love that quote from this book, and I feel like it encompasses me in a way. Like, I am exactly what that quote says, so I just needed to have it. And then the other book I picked up from the Abbey bookshop is one that I'm super excited for, and that is The Uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So many of you might know Oscar Wilde and The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is one of his most famous novels, and Oscar Wilde was famously known to be gay. And what I found really interesting about this edition is that it's the uncensored version of the novel, which essentially like puts back in all of the scenes that were cut out by the original publisher of The Picture of Dorian Gray, which were scenes of like graphic homosexual sexual content. And that just like piqued my interest like no other thing, and I just needed to pick it up. I've always wanted to read The Picture of Dorian Gray, so now I'm so excited to read this uncensored version, and I just love that we're like getting this uncensored version now, because like that shouldn't have been censored from the beginning. And yeah, I'm just really excited to see what I think of this one. Alright, and then after Paris, I was in London for the last few days of my trip, and I went to 3 different bookstores. So the first one I went to was Dauntless Books, which was the, I think, Marylebone location. It's the bigger one that's like really pretty. It has like a second floor. It was absolutely gorgeous. It does have multiple locations though, and this one had a really interesting like layout, because the bottom floor is set up by like country or like location, and so each section will have books by authors from that country or place, or books set in those countries, and it was just really interesting to see that. And so I went to like some of the sections with like Sri Lankan authors and like South Asian authors and Asian authors, and it was just really interesting to like find different selections of books in that way. So one of the books that I picked up was actually a book that I had been seeing in bookstores around the UK the entire trip, and I was like, I think I need to get this because the UK cover is so much prettier than the US cover, and that book is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed, and this is by Mariana Enriquez. This is a book that's set in Buenos Aires, and it's a series of gothic short stories that involve some really creepy and interesting speculative elements to them, and I just really freaking loved this cover. Like, I just loved this illustration at the front. It's so creepy. I love the color scheme, and I was like, you know what, this edition is something I'm not going to be able to get in Canada, so let me get it here. The second book that I picked up from Dauntless Books was a recommendation from Meg with Books. I actually went to Dauntless Books with Meg that day, and so she recommended The Honjin Murders by Sashi Yoko Mizo. This is like a cozy mystery from what I know. And it's a translated fiction from Japanese, and it's set in 1937 in Japan. And essentially it's like a murder mystery in this like small town after a wedding, and it just seems like it's gonna be a really fun and like cozy murder mystery read. And this is also actually part of a series of novels that the author has written, and I think they're all like different mysteries. So I'm really excited to see what I think of this one, and if I enjoy it, I might pick up the other books in the series, because I feel like I've always wanted more of these like cozy murder mysteries, but I'm just like tired of all of the American ones that like we get all the time and like the very Western ones. So this should be quite interesting. And then the final book that I picked up from Dauntless Books was one that I had been reading on my e-reader the entire trip, and I wanted a physical copy before I finished my trip. So that book is Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. I also really want to get this in the UK because I just prefer the UK cover to the US and Canada cover. And guys, this book, I love it so much. Like, I have so much to say about it, but I'm going to save that for my wrap up at some point of what I read in September and maybe October. I don't know. I might put those videos together, or maybe I'll do them separately. I haven't decided. But this book was like my companion throughout the entire trip. It's a longish book. It has many different characters. It's a bit of a love story. It's a bit of a like, you know, character study. And it was overall freaking fantastic, and I loved it, so I needed a physical copy. All right, and then after Dauntless Books, Meg and I actually went to another bookstore in London, and that was Gaze the Word. And this is the dedicated LGBTQIA bookstore in London, and I just loved the vibes of this bookstore. It was so cute. Literally every book in that bookstore has some sort of queer representation to it, and it's just really cool to be in there because they organize some of the books by like which representation it was. So like lesbian books, bisexual books, gay books, trans books. So it was really interesting to like look through the books and realize that like some books that I had heard of or just like vaguely seen in passing had some sort of queer representation. And it was also just really nice to just see all these queer books together and being their colorful selves. And it just made me really happy. So the first book that I decided to grab from Gaze the Word was You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. I've been seeing this book around like everywhere since it came out, I think last year, but I really wanted to grab this while I was at Gaze the Word because I just love the UK cover. It's so pretty. Like, I love these colors. I love that it's like the bi flag colors. And it's just so stunning to look at. So I knew I had to get it because I wouldn't be able to get this in Canada, so it made it that much more worth it. And I honestly don't know too much about this one. I know it's like a bit of a romance, a bit of a literary fiction, so I'm really excited to see what I think of it. The next book that I picked up from Gaze the Word was actually a book that I've been wanting to read for a while, and the second I saw in the bookstore, I was like, oh my god, I need to get this, because this one also had a really stunning UK cover, and I don't really like the US cover, so I knew I had to get this version of Tell Me How to Be by Neil Patel. So this is by a South Asian author, and it essentially follows like a mother and son who are navigating like their relationships with each other and, you know, their own lives. And the son is gay, and he is like navigating, you know, that identity and the cultural aspects of that, and also just like his personal failings and, you know, things that he's done in his life. And I'm just really intrigued to see what I think of this one. Like, it seems like it's gonna be a really like heartbreaking and just stunning novel, so looking forward to it. All right, and then the final book that I picked up at Gaze the Word was actually a non-fiction, and that is Your Silence Will Not Protect You by Audre Lorde. So this is actually a collection of Audre Lorde's writings, so like her poems, essays, that kind of thing. And honestly, I've been wanting to read Audre Lorde's works for a while now, and when I saw this beautiful pink collection, I was like, yes, I need this in my life. So I was very excited to pick it up, and I just have been feeling nonfiction so much more recently, so I'm really excited to read those. All right, and the final book on this book haul is from the final bookstore that I visited in London and in the trip in general, and that was the Notting Hill Bookshop. And I decided to actually pick up a blind date with a book from the Notting Hill Bookshop. So for those of you who don't know, the Notting Hill Bookshop, it is the bookshop in the movie Notting Hill, and it's super cute. It's in the area Notting Hill in London. It's a really beautiful and just like calm and serene area in London. And yeah, it was just a really adorable bookshop, and I just love the vibes. And I thought, since I had already bought so many books on the trip, and because there wasn't particularly a selection of books that I was like interested in at the shop, I thought it might be fun to get a blind date with a book, especially because the Notting Hill movie is like a rom-com, so like I'm going on a date with a book in this rom-com-y bookshop. But anyways, I thought I would unwrap this on camera for you guys to show you what book it is. So on the canvas it says that this is a literary fiction. It's set in France, and it involves a woman with a seemingly perfect life who's beset by a secret dissatisfaction. She's got a sex addiction and boredom, and it's captivating and edgy. All of that was pretty intriguing to me. I liked that it was set in France because I had just been in Paris. I liked that it was literary fiction, and this whole sex addiction thing had me intrigued. So yeah, overall I was like, let's see how this goes. So let's actually see how this goes. I've never done a blind date with a book, so I'm intrigued to find out what I think of this. Dun dun, moment of truth. Adele by Leila Silmani. Ooh, okay, I'm intrigued. I've never seen this book. I've never heard of this book, so this is promising. Like, I wanted to be exposed to something that I would never have picked up usually, and this has me excited. So it says, Adele has a seemingly enviable life. She is a respected journalist living in a flawless Paris apartment with her surgeon husband and their young son. But beneath the veneer of having it all, Adele is bored. She begins to orchestrate her life around one-night stands and extramarital affairs, arriving late to work and lying to her husband about where she's been until her compulsions threaten to consume her altogether. I am hyped for this now. Oh my god. So this is apparently the author of Lullaby. I've never heard of that book, but this seems like it's gonna be so much fun. Like, I'm actually so glad I got this now. Wow, this worked out so well for me. I'm so happy. I'm like actually so intrigued by this, so I just can't wait to read it. It's also such a thin book, so I'm like, I can probably read this real quick. Anyways, with that said, those are all of the books on this super long, massive vacation book haul. I went to so many lovely places. This was my first time like traveling far, like across an ocean, and I went to just so many beautiful places, visited places that I've always dreamt of going to, and now I've done it and I'm just so happy. And I loved visiting all of these bookstores in these 4 cities. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed my little stories about each of the bookshops, and I hope you enjoyed seeing what I grabbed from each of these bookstores. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought of them. I'd love to hear your opinions. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm actually filming this on October 10th, which is actually my booktube anniversary. Like, the day I created my channel was October 10th 2017, even though like I didn't really start posting videos until much later, but the initial genesis of my channel was on this day, and it just is making me emotional because it's been 6 years since I created my channel, and here we are today. Like, I'm just so proud of how far I and you guys have come, and I'm just so grateful and happy for this community here. As always, if you want to get regular updates on what I'm up to and what I'm reading, then go check out my Instagram and TikTok down below. And if you haven't heard, I have a publishing imprint. It's called Boundless Press, and if you subscribe to my exclusive community with Bindery Books, then you can get exclusive content from me, but also help me publish books through Boundless Press. If you're intrigued and want to know more, go check out my announcement video down below. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!